To kick things off today with our labor panel, just want to ask, what's one key trend that you think business leaders ought to know looking at the labor outlook?
So from the engineering manufacturing side, one of the key things that leads employees to begin their search is just a lack of vision of where they fit into the company long term. So a lack of an employer basically explaining how they see that individual adding value at all levels, and what type of growth they have there. So whether that's technical improvements on their own abilities, position promotional type opportunities, just an overall understanding of where the company's going and how they're going to impact that.
And for me, the one thing that I wanted to highlight is the importance of our international immigration flows. So even if you may not think it affects your firm directly, it's affecting the state of Iowa. We probably all know that Iowa lags the US in terms of population growth rate. Just imagine if we cut that by 40%. And that's the contribution of international immigration to Iowa's population growth.
I thought I'd highlight a trend that I'm seeing nationally that I haven't seen affect us as much in Iowa yet, and that is how we're looking at pay equity and how that affects the hiring process. So we're seeing many states and even counties put in real specific regulatory requirements on what you can ask when you're hiring somebody and how you can negotiate offers. And I think eventually we'll see more of that in Iowa, and it's something as an employer to be aware of and think through before it even gets here.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of things we could talk about in this one. The one thing that comes to my mind is, I've always had the old adage is you hire slow, fire fast. In today's market, especially with the talent like it is, having a long interview process, a 3 or 4 interview process for candidates will not be available. So what we've seen, and part of our role, in kind of the staffing space is, I feel like, education. And so I would work with our customers to say, we need to expedite the hiring process, not necessarily maybe at executive levels or strategic levels, but some of those middle level positions, we got to get a little more aggressive in expediting the hiring process.
You talked about with that pressure and doing some of the training, instead of firing fast, are you advising clients perhaps to hang on to people that maybe have a lot more development that might need to happen in order for them to fulfill exactly where they need to be at?
Yeah, I mean, every organization is different, right? So, but yeah, to me, it's all about people development and culture. So if we're onboarding folks correctly, we have a great culture, we have great leadership. We want to, I like to use the analogy of you get them on the bus or you get them off the bus, right? So if our organization has the right culture, we want to coach them and make sure that they're coming down, doing the right things, and at some point, if they're not, we let them off the bus. So.
You each touched on a little bit the migration and how that's affecting employers. Can you talk a little bit about how employers can attract people from, whether that's international migration or between states here?
Well, in terms of the international, I think obviously a lot is going to have to depend on what happens with our national immigration policies. Domestically, we're losing in our exchanges with other states. And what we've been doing for the past 20, 30 years, obviously some different signal needs to be sent out from Iowa. The most obvious would be increasing wages. I know that's difficult for a lot of firms, but it's not necessarily just an issue of marketing Iowa better. So there needs to be some kind of economic signal that lets the rest of the country know how tight things are here.
I would add on to that and say employers just need to be more open to people moving into Iowa and have a realistic expectation of how long that person might be employed with your organization. So if they're 3, 5, whatever amount of years that they're going to add a value to your company, if they do decide to move back to wherever it is they're from or another community, that you have that thought process already taking place before bringing that person on. Just because simply not hiring somebody because they may not want to live in Iowa their entire lives and work at one organization for the duration of their career should not be a prohibitor from hiring somebody from outside the state.
So he shared that with me earlier, and I'm like, well, bring him to me, because I don't actually see that same bias with the leaders and managers that I work with at Wells, and it could, maybe they're just not telling me, but I actually see a great openness to bringing people into the state. The market is so tight, and there's such great talent out there. I do find that if we can get somebody here to visit, they're more apt to stay. And so, the initial call out where we're trying to convince them to come look at us, sometimes that can be challenging, but when somebody gets here and they see Des Moines and they see what kind of house they can buy for the kind of money that it costs compared to if you're in New York or California, it does make a difference and it resonates with them. But sometimes it's just that initial call trying to get them interested in coming here.
Yeah, the only other comment that I would make, just to piggyback off the kind of 3 to 5 year, so I've been in the space since '99, and it's most, other than my friend here that's been at Wells Fargo for 20 years, that just doesn't happen all that often. And so when we're looking to engage, it's, hey, if we get a good employee for 3 to 5 years, that's good. We want them to come in, and hopefully they'll leave as a better person and a better employee for their next adventure. So I do just think, don't worry about, they may not be here the next 20 years. That's okay. Shorter term's okay.
Yeah, it was perfect timing. Carol, go ahead. And Carol, we're gonna pass along a wireless mic here, even though I know most people
I
here.
can project.
Yeah, I know you can, Carol.
Thank you. So Liesl, talk more about the wage issue, because I've heard that from several recruiters that the potential employee will look at the wonderful quality of life and all of that good stuff, but then look at that potential paycheck and say, wait a minute, if I go to Chicago, I'm gonna get 30% more, 10% more, whatever it is. So what is the gap? And then just 2 days ago, I read an article from the Omaha World Herald that said that Des Moines in particular was outpacing Omaha employers by $6,000 per year in 12 out of 16 categories. So quite frankly, I'm thinking of running a big ad campaign in Omaha. I'm serious.
Okay, in reverse order, we do actually, if we look at our exchanges of workers just between Iowa and Nebraska, that's one of the states where we actually are winning the competition. And that's, in terms of sheer numbers of workers that we attract, they're second behind Illinois. So Nebraska is a pretty good pool for attracting workers to Iowa. The wage gap, it's a little bit difficult if we compare Iowa to the US. We're about 88 to 90% of the US average in median weekly earnings, but so much of that is dependent on the job mix that it's really hard to do an apples to apples comparison. But yes, you can try and make the sale based on the lower cost of living, but that's something that has to happen with the communication that you can't always do right off the bat. So people see the wage difference and it can be a deal breaker right off the bat.
Well, and where I see it, the wage difference isn't necessarily when you hit 80 to 90,000 and above. I feel like if we're bringing somebody in at that pay, it's not that different than the same job they might get in a larger city. But when you get below that, I think that's where I see the difference. And that's also where I think, in my experience, we have a lot of jobs below that in Iowa. And so I think sometimes that's hard as well.
Are you seeing do you know what the wage increases have looked like here in the state?
Wages have been increasing slowly at about the same pace as the United States, which is kind of surprising given the tightness of our labor market. We would expect probably to see a bit more wage inflation in Iowa, a bit more rapid, but it hasn't been the case.
More questions from the audience? Yeah, Rob.
So what are you doing to help develop the pool of potential employees?
Yeah, I would say that's the $1 million question we're all trying to answer. You know, some of the things that I see, I was just talking to Gina a little bit earlier, you know, from our recruiting team, we seem to, you know, we'll be recycling through the same talent over and over, sharing with different clients. So it's starting to engage with the DMACs, the Iowa States, looking at rural. You know, I just think there's a solution out there that's not gonna, you know, we're not gonna solve it overnight. We're not gonna solve it alone, but I think, you know, getting a group together and figuring out how we get more talent into our pool. I look at rural Iowa and, you know, there's gonna be talent out there that's 60 to 90 minutes from Des Moines that doesn't wanna come to Des Moines, but how do we engage, keep small town Iowa alive so people don't move out of small town Iowa, but yet get them connected to the Wells Fargos in our market. So I think there's a solution somewhere there, but that's something that we're looking forward to digging deeper into.
I think also like some different things that we're doing at Wells Fargo is we do have different programs for internships or programs for students coming out of college. So a big area right now is we need more people in analytics. So, but when you come out of college with your analytics data degree, it still might not be enough to go into the business to do what work is needed. So we've built some programs once you're in the business to continue that growth and development. And then I think other things, and probably a lot of you are doing this, is partnering with different workforce development groups, looking at people who maybe in the past had a couple barriers to entry into employment and looking at how can we help them get positions. And sometimes that's, you know, one at a time. It might not be a big path in, but it's just more ways to look at it. And then finally, I would do a plug for the sector partnership work that's happening in the state where we're partnering with businesses and community colleges and universities to just look at what is the future ready jobs we need and how are we preparing the students. So I think getting engaged with those as well.
I would say one thing the manufacturing space is doing is they're bringing a lot of their development programs in-house to a 4-year program per se. So from a skilled trades and an hourly, there's a gap. There's not enough people coming out of the community colleges or even 4-year universities to satisfy the demand that they have there. So it's looking at what talent is available, what levels of technical ability do they have currently, and how can they take those individuals and grow them internally into the various positions that they need to have filled.
More questions from the audience? Yeah, Bob.
Hi, I saw the same article in the World Herald that Carol did, and it was actually there were 9 metropolitan areas compared, and Des Moines came in number 2, above Kansas City, above Louisville, above Madison, above several. So I'm not sure that the wage issue that you're bringing up really is persuasive to me. But what I wanted to address is the immigration issue that we have. What we run into at the county a lot are people that immigrate here, and people are surprised to hear that the #1 ethnic group coming into Des Moines, Metro Des Moines right now, are Central Africans. We find a lot of those folks and Middle Eastern and also Asians that come here have pretty high skills. They might be engineers in the home country, lawyers, teachers, these kinds of things, but when they come here, none of that translates over, so they end up with packing plants. What can we do you think, to help? We mentioned this to employers around the metro area, and they're like, well, yeah, we see the problem, but they kind of shrug their shoulders. What can we do to help upgrade these folks into, because it's a brain waste. We had an OBGYN working at Burger King not too long ago, in which we got him into a job at primary health care. So he's still not an OBGYN, but at least he's back in the healthcare field. There's a lot of these folks out there, I mean, hundreds if not thousands in this position. What can we do to help them upgrade their skills so we can get them into the proper places and for wasting their brain power?
Some of that has to be policy related in terms of looking at certification requirements for different occupations in the state. And a similar effort is underway in a lot of different states. There are some national organizations that are dedicated to specifically that issue, and they've got a lot of literature that they're putting out on different websites about how to address this issue. Another thing that I've heard discussed is at least trying to get these people, if not necessarily into the occupation for which they're trained, get them into that industry, that type of firm. And then they're closer to what they were doing, and then maybe some avenues in training programs or whatever can open up, but much better than having them working in, fast food or retail positions.
Can you talk a little bit more about the certification component and just how that ends up providing a barrier and what some of the other states might be trying to do?
I think at this point, a lot of the efforts are just reviewing what different certifications are required for different occupations, and they run the range. Some of them are highly trained. There might be teachers, requirements for practicing law, whatever, all the way down to cutting hair, massage, whatever. And so at this point, I think it's just taking stock of what the requirements are and then evaluating how much of that is really still viewed as necessary. Is it too stringent?
Anybody else have any thoughts on the immigration question? Yeah, Carol.
It isn't the very first barrier, the language. Learning to speak English, isn't that numero uno, number one obstacle for the most part? Bob, are you seeing that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I had this conversation with Angela Conley yesterday, and we were talking about how once upon a time when Governor Ray was bringing in all the Vietnamese, the churches had an overwhelming effort, just a wave of outpouring to bring these immigrants in and teach them the language, and all that seems to have evaporated. And so number one issue is language, and it has to happen at night and on weekends because these people are working at Burger King and they need daycare. So it's all of those issues, and somehow that seems to me to be a barrier that we need to eradicate, and the sooner we do that, then the portal is more open for them to be absorbed into an industry for future training.
From the panelists, is there anything you've seen specifically to the language question that you've seen businesses try to address specifically?
I haven't seen a solution, but I heard an interesting problem in that in some industries, they've been more accustomed to most of their foreign-born workers being Spanish speakers, but now the diversity of the languages is so much greater, and so that just adds to the problem.
To shift gears back a little bit to the point a couple of you mentioned that there's a lot of workers now that are coming and they're staying for just 3 to 5 years instead of these longer spans. How do you, in a management role, switch up how you maybe have viewed that in the past and how you interact with those employees or budget and that kind of thing?
Well, I think, as a manager, one of the things that's just very important to me is retention and caring for the individuals. And I think more now than ever, getting to know them, what's important to them. I work for a large company, so I don't have a big impact on changing benefits, but if you do have the ability to really learn what's important to the individual, that will help in retention. As far as, 3 to 5 years, I think it probably just depends on the job, but I'm really satisfied if I've grown somebody and they've taken another job that's an advancement for them. So I think some of that also comes into play. I don't know, I think retention right now is probably more critical than anything that I could think of as a manager.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, it comes down to the leadership. Are we investing in our employees? If we don't, they're probably not going to stay. It's getting down, really just to the personal relationships, as you said. I mean, what makes them tick? What motivates them? And we have to get to know them and lead them well. And again, I just view that as, I want anybody on our team that comes to leave a better person, not just an employee. Do we develop them as a human being, right? We all have families, we all have other things we deal with. So, for us, it's just important that we grow them. Hopefully we grow them professionally. And if they move on, that's great. We did our job. So
I think too, like looking at what's happening in your own business, and do you have any practices that are old? And like old, I mean, you look at the new generation coming into the workforce. What are they looking for? They want more flexibility. Maybe benefits look different for what they want. I mean, we're seeing some pretty cool things here in central Iowa. You have Principal that changed up their paid time off. You have Girl Scouts of Iowa where you can bring your new baby to work. Like, what are we doing as employers to think about what does the new generation really want? Because I think if we could zone into that more, we probably would change some of the attrition that we're seeing.
Everything constantly now with social media, kind of the stereotype of the millennial is they're constantly talking to their friends, their family, everybody they know about everything about their job, the flexibility they have, the perks, a lot of the benefits. So just being real as an employer with what you're capable of, what's possible in your organization, and communicating that to the employee that this is something that our business model cannot support, or maybe it is something that you're hearing often enough that should be something that's changed. How can we address those 60 to 90 minute away from Des Moines people and bring them in and still have a collaborative space? Maybe they come in once a month, something like that. So just being open to the change and knowing that people are going to be comparing consistently.
That was interesting. You talked about the comparing part. When you see a new benefit like the bring your baby to work or unlimited PTO, I'm curious if you were a business and you were trying to evaluate bringing a practice like that in, especially when it's a brand new one. What are some things maybe you would be looking at before you went ahead and jumped off and went ahead and had babies at your office? Speaking for a friend, right?
Well, I mean, I think, if you have the option to talk to your team and find out what's important to them, I mean, I think that's what led to some of the changes that we're seeing here in town with companies. I think listening to what is a really important factor of why somebody wants to work for you would be the first place to start.
Are there any of some of the new benefits that you've seen that maybe after running their course for a few years that have had a chance to, the unlimited PTO is one that over the last few years you've seen more and more of that, but I know that there are also some potential negatives of that type of approach, and so I'm just curious if there are any benefits that maybe have fallen out of favor even though they were maybe really attractive early on.
I would say though, the unlimited PTO is definitely not feasible for most of the manufacturers out there. So just them being creative in how they're going to address that comparison. So if they obviously have to have personnel there to manufacture whatever product it is they have, how are they going to compete with the companies of the world that have unlimited PTO? Just flexibility in general, understanding that the workforce now can work pretty much whenever they're awake or wherever they're at if they have their phone, internet access for the most part. So just being understanding that you might be able to have a flexible schedule and still be able to accommodate what those people are looking for with something like an unlimited PTO plan.
This doesn't answer your question, and actually I would love unlimited PTO, so I wish I had that. One benefit that came to Wells Fargo that I think has been life-changing, because I see my team and this, just life happens and you have hard times, and we have caregiver leave. So we've always had leave if you have a child, and that's been increased at Wells Fargo, but now we also have caregiver leave, where if somebody in your family where you need to step away from work for a period of time, you can do that and get paid. And so to me, that has been such a shift because life always happens, and now people don't have to worry about what are they going to do. There's a way for them to manage that.
More questions from the audience? Yeah, Michaela.
I'd love to ask a question about how you hire for soft skills. Is that something that the question was how, as hiring managers, you're looking at soft skills. You might have somebody who works at a totally different industry but has the soft skills that you need in your position, or somebody who looks fabulous on a resume and has all of the career experience you want but maybe doesn't have the soft skills. How are you looking for those in the interview process?
So a lot of the companies that we work with, the soft skills seem to be the most important thing. They can train if they got some technical, and again, so we sit more in the IT space, so having some technical foundation is great. And a trend that's changed drastically over the last 20 years is now IT is looked at as a strategic part of the business. They want IT people to understand the business, to do analytical work, analyst work. So the soft skills are key. So a lot of the folks that we work with, soft skills are even more important than the technical skills.
I'm seeing the same trend in the financial services. Now, we're very regulated, so we also have to be very concise on the hiring process and competencies that we look for. But we still do a lot of behavioral-based interviewing. We do a lot of online artificial intelligence kind of assessments as well. But what I'm hearing from hiring leaders is they're getting to a point where maybe past experience isn't the most important thing to them, and they'd like to figure out how can I more just learn how this person operates, what are their competencies and talents they're bringing to the table. And so that's a shift I am seeing right now as well as, and I think it's really great because I think in the past in financial services, if you weren't in financial services, a hiring manager might not talk to you. And now they're like, wait a minute, there's so much more innovation and creativity we can bring if we start bringing in people from other industries.
Yeah, Rebecca.
I would concur with what you said 100% with regard to hiring employees, looking at soft skills side of things. And as a firm that deals with we help some firms do recruiting, and what we find is most important is the interview process. It's very key as part of that process. And when you're looking for soft skills, it's a question of identifying what those soft skill competencies are, what those skills are, and then asking the proper questions. And the questions don't necessarily have to do with, well, what was your experience, but asking them about specific situations that these individuals dealt with to get an idea of what their competencies are and how high their skill level is with regard to those competencies. So, and there's one other comment. In working with companies to help employee engagement and retention, we find that probably the most important element in any organization outside of leadership is an element of leadership, which is the manager that the individual works with. So if you don't have a good manager, the hiring isn't going to do you any good. You're going to lose people. Your organization isn't going to work right. So I absolutely agree with you that, what you said. That's it.
More questions? Yeah, Catherine. I'm going to make Jason run laps over here. So,
so high school training, there is a big push in central Iowa for something called standards-based grading. Thank you. Called standards-based grading, and it is where kids don't get an F, they don't fail, nobody's a failure, the feedback is a lot softer. They can take tests as many times as they would like. And there's a lot of inconsistencies, I feel, like what's happening in the high schools with what the employers need in a great employee, which is somebody that understands you do have to do a task, you have to do a skill. We don't give you 20 times to do that manufacturing job because that's going to be very expensive. So I feel like our high schools are trending, and it's spreading quite a bit with the standards-based grading that is substandard-based grading. And I wonder what you think about that, if that is reflected in the workplace. Do you see this when you're hiring? You're probably hiring more of a higher somebody that's been through college, et cetera, but there are some inconsistencies, and I was wondering if you are aware of that or can reflect on that.
Well, I'll comment on that because I'm with you.
Good.
So, yeah, I don't like that at all because I don't believe that's preparing our kids for the real world, right? To me, it's you're getting the participation ribbon. It's okay if you fail a test. You know what? You don't get to do it again. You need to prepare properly up front. So I'm a little old school with that, but I agree. It's an alarming trend. I don't know what that answer is, but I 100% agree. And again, our group doesn't hire very entry-level people, so we don't necessarily see it. I guess I'm just commenting on, I think it's an issue that we should certainly look into because it's a problem.
Yeah, and I'm a mom of 3. I have 2 guys in college and 1 in high school, and so I've wrestled with it just personally as well because we, came from a generation where that wasn't the case. I think, I don't know how it translates into the workforce because college, I feel like, is not like that, but I think if they're learning the concept, that's what I care about. So whether it took you 2 times to learn it or, whatever the story is. So when I think about coming into the workforce, It's, at Wells Fargo, it's not cutthroat to learn your, if it's, especially I think about like an entry-level job. You come in, you've never been in a call center, and you have to learn how to be on the phone. You don't get one shot and you're out. So we do give you an opportunity to learn it. There's some grace if you don't do it right. So I don't know if it's affecting the workforce, but I know it affects you when you go into college, because college is not like that. Yeah.
Lysel, do you see, when you're working with college students, you're often working with college students that maybe would be a product of coming out of an education system that's maybe a little bit different now. Do you see any changes in the generation that's not yet in the workforce? And not necessarily, it doesn't have to directly be related to that question, but just out of curiosity, what you're seeing.
I'm not one of those people who thinks that there's any fundamental difference between kids today and kids when I was a kid. And they're so bright, the ones that I work with, and they're so energetic. And so I have a pretty optimistic view of the future workforce. I'm sorry, I don't have a lot of concrete evidence of that, but they impress me.
I'm starting to get away enough from the entry-level jobs that I finally have a generation that I can be upset with. So, it's nice. More questions? Yeah, right up. Actually, I'm going to go to Scott in the back, and then I'll come right back up to you.
So, question involving the cliff effect, especially entry-level workers and call center workers. I know there's plenty of those in the industry in Des Moines. What are you seeing that's working to offset that? That's really the question. I know it's simply potentially paying them more, but is it daycare offerings through the employer? Are there other things that you're seeing that is helping to combat that rather than having potential workers just stay at home because they can't make enough to offset the daycare?
Can somebody, Lisa, maybe you'd be a good person to describe the cliff effect really quickly?
I was going to ask him too.
Okay, sounds good. So I can take a crack at it. So I think the idea being oftentimes they're in a job that's providing a wage that they're still able to receive benefits, things like food stamps and things to that effect, correct? And then they don't want to get promotions because then some of those social support systems would potentially go away.
Correct, that's part of it, and the other is just they won't get into the job market itself, because if they do, they would end up making less. Let's just hypothetical, say they are getting $10 an hour and staying at home through unemployment or welfare or whatever the case might be, and then they would get $15 an hour if they went to work, but the daycare gap there, so the $5 an hour in daycare cost would be, let's say the daycare cost is $7 an hour, so they're actually losing money by not staying at home taking care of their kid as opposed to going into the workforce and being productive in that environment as well.
Any thoughts on how employers might be able to play a role in that?
Well, it's definitely a real issue, and I think we've seen it in Central Iowa as we've seen our wages move up in those entry-level places. I think it's caused that quite a bit here. I don't know what people are doing. I know some employers are offering daycare. I know there's been some flexibility with hours. So is there a way to work with that individual in that situation with their hours? Maybe they're sharing hours with a spouse on how they work. I think it's a big issue in Central Iowa, though, and I think we will continue to see it as we have such a large band of jobs falling right in that category. Housing is, we need more affordable housing. I think it's quite complex, the issue at hand, but I know at Wells Fargo when we did increase our starting salary, we had some individuals that fell in that range where, we worked with them individually on that, and maybe that's another thing employers can do, again, is know your team members and see if there is something that you can do individually for somebody.
Lisa, from a workforce participation standpoint, I'm just curious what you're seeing in terms of, when we talk about unemployment rate, obviously that doesn't include people that have stopped looking for work, and so I'm just curious how close we might actually be to true full employment.
I looked at some numbers. Iowa's participation rates can get a little bit skewed because we have an older population. Labor force defines, or Bureau of Labor Statistics defines the labor force, everyone's 16 and older. But if we just look at that prime age workforce, which is 25 to 54, so it's people who hopefully are finished with their college education or whatever educational attainment they're going to pursue. and then up through age 54. Iowa currently ranks #1 in all states in our participation rate. We're close to 90%. So we have really, really little slack. We don't have that many people in that prime age working group who are not working. But nationally, if you look at that same group and you compare men to women, there's been some research that looks at what are the life situations of these people, and for the women, their life situation is usually the top one is some sort of caregiver, so either for children or for elderly parents. For men, it's some sort of disability or injury, so it's particularly an issue for women, just that whole need to be a caregiver. And so I think that's something that employers should be aware of, that even if a cliff effect isn't involved, even if it's not a dollars and cents, it's just the time commitment and the need for flexibility. And that could be a huge reason why we're not able to eke out that last 10% of our prime working age population into the workforce.
Are there times in Iowa's past that we've been at that type of employment level? And I know that might be hard for you to specifically answer data-wise, but I'm just curious if we're in something that's really, truly unique at this point.
Not really. We have been higher. I'm not sure about the prime working age participation rate, but our overall participation rate has been climbing again, and but it's still not back to where it was before the recession. So in Iowa and nationwide, it did decline quite a bit after the last recession.
Knowing that there isn't a lot of slack, what does that mean for Iowa in terms of attracting these bigger companies that want to come here and have 1,000 jobs, for example?
They're going to have to bring their workers with them.
I can answer that. They don't come. And commercial real estate, we've definitely been passed over by companies that are shopping due to concerns over ability to hire, and they go to competitive markets outside of the state.
When that happens, what are they looking? Is it specific job level in terms of wage level?
In some cases, it's call center. In
Yeah.
some cases, it's financial services. I mean, there are lots of different flavors that they are recruiting for, but often when they're needing to come in, if it's a decision whether to open, a 300, 400, 500 person center, oftentimes they're too nervous about the talent and will go somewhere where they're more confident in it. In fact, we have companies that could be growing in Iowa now that are having to open centers in different states because the recruiting is so much better. So even though they're headquartered here, their outside satellite offices are growing faster. And so there's a real risk of even losing them as a corporate citizen.
So part of the question, the answer there was that we'd have to bring them in from out of state if they're talking 1,000 people for a fulfillment center or something like that.
Is that what you were saying, Lisa? That you said they'd have to bring their own workers.
Yeah, it was somewhat facetious, but we're not going to be able to squeeze those out of our current labor force, so whether the company brings them or if we're just able to attract them either internationally or from other states. Each year, we have a certain number who reach retirement age, and then we have a certain number who reach working age. And so that's actually, those numbers are fairly close. It's going to get a little bit worse in the next 10 years. So it's not that our labor force is necessarily depleting, but in terms of growth opportunities, really it's got to come from outside the state for the most part.
Do any of you see a difference in the strategy that the company would use? Say you need 50 or 100 employees, which would be a pretty big lift in this market anyway, versus the 1,000 employee or 2,000 employee play. What do you do when you're at the higher end of that as far as what you offer? And do you see companies adjusting what they offer based on how many positions they have? But I think it's just, again, employers having to be flexible. Back to Scott's point on call center, we have a call center, contact center, and a lot of our agents work from home. So with technology today, VDI, they don't have to be in our center. And what happens, that lowers our cost, which as we're managing that workforce, that's a really tough level of person to employ today. But, you know, again, employers just have to, again, think out of the box just a little bit and just having flexibility with the workforce, whether it be work from home or, you know, remote a few days. You just have to get out of the, I would say, that older mindset of 8 to 5 in this brick and mortar building.
We had more talent here. We would probably have more companies coming. I could bring more jobs here from Wells Fargo. But because the talent supply is what it is, and if you want a competitor advantage, we don't see a lot of companies right now giving that flexible work schedule. I mean, we probably all think we have some of that, but if you really look at a lot of the companies here, most people are still sitting in brick and mortar. And so that could be a competitive advantage to get more people at your company, besides wages, right? I think right now we're playing a wage game with each other. And if a new company came in, that's how they'd get 1,000 people, is they'd just offer more than we're offering locally, and people would probably move. I see people moving from call center to call center for $2. So flexibility, though, is a different benefit we're not seeing.
Well, and I think, you know, we're all talking about Project Blue Jay, I think, which is, I think they're moving forward pretty quick. And so if the 1,000 jobs were coming in, and typically they're warehouse jobs, I believe, Kathy, you know, $15 an hour. So at that type of a rate, what type of effect would that? Obviously, there's going to be folks that are in jobs that are making $10, $12 an hour that would be very attractive to. So is that the type of level that's going to be most affected then? Would you see people moving for those type of jobs? In other words, would they be able to find the 1,000 because they're coming in at a rate that's high enough?
Well, so I'm not in the warehouse business,
Sure.
so I don't know that answer, but I think that, I think $15 an hour would still be low compared to, you know, a lot of the jobs in town are competing right now at 15. So if you're kind of come in and staff up 1,000 jobs, you probably need to be higher than 15. But
So
I'm not in that business. So.
I can kind of jump on the warehouse side there. So for the warehouse game in Des Moines, $15 an hour is pretty attractive comparatively. So it is, most of those companies that are coming in and have 1,000 jobs at $15 an hour are ultimately going to pick them off from local companies that aren't able to pay that wage. So from a company standpoint, analyzing where you've been, you know, what's your track record for moving up your entry-level point in the warehouse? Are you keeping up with what a new entry-level person is going to be getting elsewhere? And then also just knowing your competition. So it's not just the people that have the warehouse experience that are going to be sought after for that. It's anybody that has the skill set in whatever industry they are. Maybe it's retail, maybe it's in the fast food game, that are going to be the ones getting those positions. So just opening up a little bit more, knowing who your competition is and how you're going to advertise what you have to offer as a company, benefits. That's come up several different times with the flexibility. But what are you going to have that's going to separate yourself a little bit from those employers? But another thing from the outside, people that are typically in that income bracket really struggle to financially move themselves here for those types of positions. So from an employer standpoint, being able to assist with that is not only going to allow that person to see the buy-in from you as the employer and you showing that you're interested in helping them get here, but typically those often have a payback term on them, so it aids in retention of that person for at least a year or two, whatever that may end up being.
So do you
Kathy?
see those, you talked about knowing your competition, do you see those existing businesses now upping their salary up to $15 an hour or higher?
Some have increased their, especially in the warehouse. They have just due to losing people to the new players in town. Some
Will
aren't.
they do it in anticipation of Project Blue Jay?
You know, I haven't heard that anybody has yet. There's been some other DCs that have opened up recently that have definitely affected the warehouse wage over the last couple of years. So those big jumps have affected that. But I haven't specifically heard anything on this instance.
And then can you talk a little more in depth about the impact on other businesses? If there's a business that's starting to lose to new businesses coming in, where are they going to find workers?
Right. So you know, being creative with what you're willing to consider from a technical standpoint. So The financial services was mentioned earlier, the cookie cutter person that you have historically looked for might not be what's going to be the target audience in the future. Maybe it's somebody coming from the fast food industry, specifically looking at warehouse. Fast food is going to have a high-paced environment, very similar to a warehouse, a lot of attention to detail with a lot of different factors playing into their day, and then just a willingness to train. So being able to train people that might come from a different background, industry-wise, and how you can get them up to speed, and then providing evaluations along the way. So if you're looking at a wage, bringing somebody in at a lesser wage, being real with checkpoints with them on, meet these criteria or indicators by X given number of days, and see an incentive from there. I definitely see that being something moving forward as well.
Lisa, what do you see in the aging population, and are there individuals who would be willing to come back to work for an employer, but maybe it's like a flexible schedule or shorter schedule? Are you seeing that as a viable option for us to be looking at?
Yeah, participation rates among older workers are increasing nationally and in Iowa. And it's actually probably going to be really important because one of the things that's happening just with our state's demographics, as I mentioned earlier, we have that outflow every year of people who reach retirement age. And then we have the inflow of people who reach working age. But you obviously don't replace a retiring upper-level manager with a 16 or 17-year-old. So where I think we're really going to feel the pinch is in that younger middle management or soon-to-be executives. So if we look at the number of people turning 40 every year, it's actually going to go down as the number turning 65 each year goes up. So again, I think we're going to feel a real pinch in that the managerial level, the upper level positions in our companies. So I think that's probably going to be an added enticement for older workers to stay in because we're going to have a lot of demand for some of those higher level, more mature workers.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on that. So part of what we do and what we've seen in the market is a lot of folks will retire from companies and come back in contracting. So we do a lot of staff aug with, whether it's executive levels or whatever the levels are. We see a lot of retired folks from a Principal or a Wells Fargo, some of the other companies that have a lot of talent. They've just chosen to retire from that corporate world. So we utilize, organizations like ours in that contracting world to engage them back in the workforce. So just other options for employers to look at in augmenting their staff when they're needed skills. And, there is a ton of skills in those people that we can re-engage. There's just other options for you to look at.
Yeah, there was a question over here I promised to get back to. So.
Yeah. Analytics was mentioned earlier, so I'd be curious your perspective on the analytics labor market here in Iowa and what you predict it to be. There continues to be a forecast that talent is going to be needed in the future, and just would love to hear your perspective about what the market's like.
Well, I think we need a lot more. And actually, I think it would be a great field if any of you have children that they're thinking about what do they want to go into. I think the world in general is not producing enough people who are data scientists, business analytics. If you're thinking about getting your master's, that would be a really smart place to look as well. Companies are going to continue to need to drive with data, and there are not enough. So in central Iowa, if I had, so my team does fill analytics consultants, it would be very hard for us to fill those jobs here right now.
Lisa, I want to go back to something that you were talking about, that gap in the middle management. A few years ago, you were on a panel and you were talking about the birth rate here in Greater Des Moines, but we wouldn't feel and being one of the higher ones in the metro in the region. So I'm curious, but we won't feel the effect of that for still a long time on the entry level.
Right, we have to wait.
Correct.
Yep.
So would you mind just rehashing that a little bit? And I'm just curious if that's a trend that you think will continue in this market.
You're asking me to remember
I know.
Yeah, I looked at Des Moines compared to a lot of Midwestern metros, and that was one of the brightest spots for Des Moines was the natural growth rate was really, really high here. So if we're willing to wait the 25, let's say 25 years, because we want to get them through college, then I think there will be an advantage here, but we have to weather that storm of, we had two things that really worked together. We had the 1980s, which Iowa actually lost population, and it was farm crisis and recession and a lot of other things. And then we also had the natural dip in the birth rate. And so together that just created a smaller cohort that is working its way through the labor force now. And so that's what we're starting to see in Iowa in terms of not being able to replace the retiring workers with that next group, because it shrunk. We lost those people when they were kids. We lost their parents, and then they weren't born here. And then also just they weren't born at all because birth rates had been on a decline. So I guess that's a triple storm, not a double storm.
So I'm going to add something. We haven't even touched on this topic, but when I think about labor trends coming, I think a lot of the research I read says we don't even know what jobs are going to be here in 3 to 5 years. So when I think about then as an employer, what am I doing for my team to continue to upskill? Because what we need today is probably not what we need in 3 years, and it's not. Like if you read any research, and for even all of us sitting in here, what are we doing to be students of our profession? Because it is going to continue to change, and I think that's going to be the competitive advantage for employers, how you're looking forward and getting your staff ready for what's coming.
We have about 5 minutes left, and so what I'd be really curious, you were talking about some of the retention and attraction benefits. I'm just curious if you could go down the line and maybe identify something interesting you've seen, or maybe a program of some sort that maybe could be applied to somebody's business if they were looking at it. Anybody have one that they could think off the top of their head? We've talked about the
I gave my good one
bring your
already.
I know you already gave one, so if anybody else has one.
I would guess from a retention standpoint, one thing that a lot of companies, again speaking specifically for the manufacturing and engineering side of things, is as we consistently add technology into those areas, looking at the entry-level person that has that technological ability versus tenure that you have within that organization that maybe does not have that technical ability, and how the wage difference might take place there. So, and also just salary compression in general. You know, if we're not analyzing what we have currently from a staff standpoint, and the entry-level wage keeps going up, just not being able to pay that entry-level person what they're worth, as well as paying somebody that's been there maybe 5-10 years what they're worth, is definitely causing a problem with area manufacturers that I've seen.
And then I think very similar to that, and a point you brought up earlier, is the importance of working with the employees on the career path planning. And in Iowa, we have seen that we do tend to lose a lot of people. This is a great place to attract young workers. There's perhaps a lack of opportunity for that next career step, and so if the employees, while we've got them here, can see a clear path for advancement within the company, then I think that could improve retention.
I see a lot of students and employees very interested in tuition reimbursement. So when you talk about we don't have the skills maybe for the future, that's just such an amazing perk. The other thing is community involvement, whether it's volunteer days off or you volunteer as a group. The people coming into the workforce want to be connected and want to see their employer connected. So it's another benefit, and it also, supports our community.
Yeah, I'll just piggyback off that one because we hadn't talked about it either, but the millennials coming in, it's all about a cause, right? I mean, it's what does your company stand for? What is your vision? Those things today kind of rate above your compensation, if you will. So, it's having goals and visions above the profitability of your company. What else are you doing in your community to impact the community that matters?
All right, so we're just about out of time. I'm going to have them each give one final closing thought, something maybe we haven't touched on today, or something that maybe we can take back to our offices. Before we do that, just a couple quick things to let you know about. Our next Power Breakfast event is on November 13th. Perry Beeman is going to be moderating that event. We're going to be talking about water and water quality and water recreation. There's a lot of efforts around that topic right now and how it intersects with business. A lot of the business community is involved in that topic and issue, so that's going to be a great discussion. Perry's put together a great panel for that, so I'd love to have you out at that. Also on November 14th, just the next day afterwards, we're going to be celebrating our 20th anniversary for Women of Influence. We've got more than 75 of the past Women of Influence that are going to be there. They're going to have the opportunity, attendees will have the opportunity to network with them. We'll do some roundtable type stuff where you're going to get to move around a little bit in kind of speed networking style to be able to pick their brains and get to learn from them as well, and we're going to honor them at the same time. So both of those are coming up. We'd love to have you out at those. And then lastly, our best story ideas come from everybody here in the audience. So if something today sparked an idea, or you've got something going on in your business that you'd like to tell us and maybe help share with the rest of the business community, the best way for us to help other folks in the business community is to understand what you're dealing with and the challenges and the issues that you're trying to overcome. So I'd appreciate you to reach out to Emily, and she can help connect you with one of our reporters and of course our reporting staff that is here as well. So with that, we're going to go ahead and start all the way down there and we'll give you the closing thoughts.
So kind of closing thought from our attention standpoint is just encourage open communication, top down and bottom up within the organization to really get a handle on what everybody is interested in as a whole. So trying to provide what those people actually want is ultimately going to help retain them long term.
And looking at U.S. employment growth projections, in terms of industry and occupation, healthcare is going to be the biggest demander of workers in terms of growth. And so I think keeping an eye on what that industry is doing in terms of benefits, attraction, retention, it might be a good model.
I think, I think Des Moines is an amazing place to live and work, and I think if all of us would, continue to be involved in the different workforce organizations and the Des Moines Partnership and really continue to build it, we will see more people come. So I think it's just really continuing to work together.
Yeah, so last thing I would say, and we haven't really spoken a whole lot about it, is just using that contracted labor. A lot of our clients like to do a contract for hire model, so it actually expedites the hiring process too. If you look at a consultant option, and then if that individual works out, you have the opportunity to flip those into your full-time workforce. So again, just different ideas to try to find talent is going that route.
Thank you all for coming today. My name is Chris Konetsky again. If I can ever be of any help, if I can help you in your business, please reach out my way. And lastly, can I get a big round of applause for the panelists? Thank you all.